It is with great pleasure that I introduce today's speaker, Annette Harris. She is the first program alumni to come back and speak at colloquium, so this is a very significant event. Let me tell you about the professional credentials, and then I can tell you more about her time when she was here. So Annette Harris has a Master's of Public Policy and a Master's in Public Health from the University of Utah, and is currently pursuing a PhD in Public Health. And I'm sure she will be talking about what she's specializing in and the kind of work that she is doing. And that program is at Johns Hopkins University in Maryland. She, I think, has been a resident here in Utah for her entire life. Okay, well, no, that's right, because you were in the Army, and so you were moving around a lot, but settled here in the adulthood, yes, and calls it home. Annette was our first student assistant in the Women's Studies program, what was then called the Women's Studies program. So was that 2012? Yes, and the program was much smaller. She came in and said, "This many people are in colloquium?" Like, yes, and it keeps getting better and better. I think probably then we had maybe 10 or 12 minors, and now we average over 200. And I know things have really grown. And Annette was just such a fireball. We knew then that not only would she be good for our program, but that she would go on and do a lot of tremendous things. So today she's going to be talking to you about the work that she does in public health.
Hi, this is crazy. I'm gonna try to stay calm, but this is really, 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 really fun for me. I've called my talk today "Some Little Good: Weaving Women's Studies Through a Public Health Career." And the reason I've called it that has to do with this quote. I'll give bonus points. I guess I put the name. If you know who said this, it's Dr. Martha Hughes Cannon. Does anyone know where this statue is? How about bonus points for that? Yep, Utah State Capitol building. So let me just read this quote. "Let us not waste our talents in the cauldron of modern nothingness, but strive to become women of intellect and endeavor to do some little good while we live on this protracted gleam called life." So, Martha Hughes Cannon, I'm going to spend a little bit of time talking about her first, and I think you'll figure out why pretty quick. Her statue is actually one of two that represent Utah in Washington, D.C. The other one is Brigham Young. And she is, I mean, kind of, when I was trying to figure out what exactly to list in the intro of Martha Hughes Cannon, it was sort of like, well, what didn't she do? You know, she kind of did a little bit of everything. So, born in Wales, 1857, her family immigrated to Utah in 1861, so just when she was a tiny kid. She lost multiple family members to infectious disease along the way. And that's important. That really shaped a lot of things that she decided to do later in her life. As a teenager, she worked as a typesetter for the Women's Exponent under editor Emmeline B. Wells. Which, by the way, you're Global Women's Studies at BYU. You all know what the Women's Exponent is, right? Okay, great. She worked for the Women's Exponent as a teenager, like I said, and then she earned money to get her bachelor's degree at what was then Deseret University, which is now University of Utah, in chemistry in 1879. She went on to earn her medical degree from the University of Michigan, where she was the only woman in her class. She then got a degree in pharmaceuticals from the University of Pennsylvania, where she was the only woman in her class. She then earned a degree from the National School of Elocution and Oratory in Philadelphia. She wasn't the only woman in her class there. There were two. But she became known as a very, quote, forcible and eloquent speaker. And as you can see in here, she put that to good work in politics. We'll talk a little bit more about that. So after all of this school, so that's 4 degrees for those that are counting, She came back to Utah and she became the resident physician of the Deseret Hospital. I didn't misspeak there. It's not a resident physician of the the resident physician of the Deseret Hospital. And you can see a memorial to her at This Is the Place Park, if you ever want to see that. They have the a reframing of the hospital there. In 1884, she became the fourth wife to Angus Cannon. And in 1896, white women in Utah became able to vote again. So they were able to vote before, they were disenfranchised, and then in 1896, they were able to vote again. And Martha Hughes Cannon was the first woman to register to vote when that became available. So that's pretty cool. But not only that, she ran for office that year. There was an open seat in the Senate, and there were 10 people running, and one of the 10 was actually her husband, Angus Cannon, and also Emmeline B. Wells, and she won. So Martha Hughes Cannon won, beating her husband and Emmeline B. Wells, her former boss, which is, I think, kind of funny. When asked what she thought about becoming the first female senator in the U.S., she said, "Oh, I hadn't thought of it in that light. I do seem to be a sort of milestone, don't I? Well, I'll have to try to live up to my privileges." A humble person. That was a quote from Deseret News, I think it was called even back then. So her legislative priorities are really why I love her. She established the Utah Board of Health. In fact, the Utah Department of Health headquarters, the main building, is called the Martha Hughes Cannon Building after her. She worked on legislation advocating for women's safety at work, so she mandated that women in certain industries be able to sit down while they work, which wasn't mandated before. She advocated for vaccination. In fact, there was a large smallpox outbreak in southern Utah when she was in office, and she herself made sure that vaccines were sent. There was a bit of a scuffle in the press with some other politicians saying that vaccinations were dangerous. This is sounding very familiar, I think, to those of us today. And she had this really fiery back and forth in the op-eds of the newspaper about how vaccinations are good and safe, and she really advocated for that and passed some laws about that. She made other sanitation laws, and sanitation laws at the time, that was public health. That's what public health was called. Including sewage system development and things like that, things that affect public health. Later in her life, she was very involved. She was the president of the American Congress Against Tuberculosis. So another thing to note, I think, is that her political career, she served one term. It was cut short because she became pregnant with her second child, but at the time polygamy was illegal, and so she had to go into hiding. She bounced around the East Coast. She went to Europe for a while, and then back to California. But that's why she only had one term. So, what does all of that mean? Why did I want to bring that up and tell you all about Martha Hughes Cannon? Well, another thing before I start talking about myself, another thing that I love about Martha Hughes Cannon is that she advocated for a view of motherhood that is important to me, and it's something that has driven my own view of motherhood. And I'll just read this quote, which I think is great. "You give me a woman who thinks about something besides cook stoves and wash tubs and baby flannels, and I'll show you 9 times out of 10 a successful mother." Now, she's not saying you never think about cook stoves and wash tubs, and I personally love baby flannels, but that's not what you can be. These things are not mutually exclusive, and that's what Martha Hughes Cannon really showed, I think, through her career and her life. She was a devoted mother. But one of the ways that she showed her devotion to motherhood is by pursuing these really fulfilling things in her career and in politics. So let me tell you about me a little bit. I I was telling Heather, or Dr. Sorry. Yeah, I was telling Dr. Belknap that I was maybe going to get emotional, but the fact is that women's studies was the passion of my time at BYU. And that's really saying something because I also met my spouse and got married at BYU. But I found women's studies early on. I was a freshman the year that the Women's Research Institute was closed. And that out of that sort of shift in administration came I'll call it a reimagining, I think, of the women's studies program, with a new academic home base. And so I took Intro to Women's Studies my first semester, loved it. I knew, okay, this is my thing. These are my people. These are the things that I like to study. At the time, brand newly appointed was Valerie Hegstrom as the coordinator of women's studies, and I didn't know, but I thought that she might need an assistant, a student assistant. And I knew that I could do it better than anyone else. And so I marched to her office in the JFSB, unannounced. No, I didn't send her an email or anything ahead, and I used some very bold language, and I know this because I wrote it in my journal to practice. So I'm going to read you what I wrote in my journal in preparation of accosting Dr. Hegstrom in her office. I heard you are the new coordinator of women's studies. I absolutely must be involved in as many ways as I can. I'm smart and hardworking, and I don't have a major yet, so it's not like I'm super busy. I just got an A in Intro to Women's Studies, so what do you think? I'm not totally sure if I said those exact words, but that's what I brainstormed in preparation. So to her credit, she was completely unfazed by this very strident freshman. She asked, how about you be my TA? I said yes. Shortly after, I became the assistant program coordinator. I'm not sure what the title was. And I stayed in that role for the rest of my time at BYU. So like sorry, I keep wanting to call you Heather. Okay, like Heather said, I was in sort of that inaugural cohort of women's studies, and including the first Women's Studies Honor Society. And to this day, I wear my pin whenever I'm nervous to give a presentation, including today, as you can see. Pictured here in the corner is my first day in the office that was allotted to us. At the time, you can see all the boxes because everything just got moved in. I had just finished unpacking those books, and I snapped this photo just to remember. I printed that sign above the door that says Women's Studies because people kept on coming into the office thinking it was an IT. I'm not sure why. And so I put a Women's Studies sign, and that seemed to help. My most notable memory, and I've actually never told this publicly before, so this is my most notable memory sitting in that office, the old Women's Studies office in the JFSB, was I was sitting there minding my own business. I was probably designing a colloquium poster or something. And the door swings open, and in rushes Jimmer Fredette, the basketball player, okay? He was big, he was hot stuff at the time. It seems like everyone still knows who he is, but Jimmer Fredette, he was a student at the time. He busted the door open, and I just remember he's like breathless, and he goes, "Hey," and I said, "Hey," and he said, "If there's a women's studies, why isn't there a men's studies?" And I have to tell you guys that it was very sincere. The energy was not confrontational. But I think he was really wondering. I think he was just walking by and was like, "What?" and decided to ask. In a rare moment of actually having the perfect answer in a time like this, I said, "The history and philosophy departments are upstairs." Okay. Okay, so now that I had my minor sorted out as the most passionate student in women's studies, there were 7 of us at the time, all of whom I'm still connected with and very close with. I turned my attention to the more minor priority, which was my major. At the time, I was planning on actually joining ROTC and following in my father's footsteps in the military. I'm an Air Force kid. To that end, I was focusing a lot on my general education classes, and I was like working out and practicing for the PT test, which you have to do in ROTC. One day after working out in the RB, is the RB still there? Okay, because the HVAC is gone, so I don't know what's going on. One day after working out in the RB, I looked up from the drinking fountain, and I can still remember it totally clearly. It was like even lit. There was like sunshine through a window, so it was like spotlit. There was this flyer above the drinking fountain that said, "Students, want to do a little good in this world? Come to an info session about the public health program," and then had the time and day and the room and stuff. Well, something about this flyer really, I don't know. I was like, yeah, I do want to do a little good in this world. And so I went, and very quickly, again, immediately convinced, I found my thing, I found my people, I found the thing that I like to study. What I liked about public health then, just as I do now, is that it's a perfect mix of the so-called hard and soft sciences. So, epidemiology, biostatistics, these things are vital in public health. And I don't know, are there any public health students in here? Nice. So epidemiology, biostats, they're foundational really to public health, but they're useless without understanding the social determinants of health also. So those, for all of you that aren't public health students, social determinants of health, these are the social factors that sort of layer and interact with each other that affect someone's health. Think economics, education, community, context, are you equal in the community where you are? Policies that could affect you, the environment. And there are a lot of unique social determinants of health to women. And so the combination of women's studies and public health was so complementary and powerful that it was perfect for me, and I just never looked back. And I still think it's the perfect combo for anyone who's still looking for a major or whatever. Really think about public health. I can't exactly remember. Okay, so I found my major. Here's kind of what happened next, and I'm going to speed run through some things here. At BYU, I studied abroad. I went to Arusha, Tanzania, so that's a city right at the foot of Mount Kilimanjaro. I learned Swahili there, conversational, not fluent. I graduated from BYU in 2013, and I began working in refugee resettlement in Salt Lake City. What I did in refugee resettlement was completely driven by my women's studies education. So my job was called Complicated Cases in Women's Health Case Manager, which meant that I worked with women with a refugee background here in Utah who had complicated situations. Domestic violence, homelessness, heavy things like that, but also just pregnancy, a normal pregnancy, or job prep, or citizenship test prep, things like that. I was just, I could be called on by the other case managers to help refugee women with a little bit more. I really thrived in that field. I kind of thought, oh, I've done it again. I found my thing. I found my people. I found the thing that I like to research. I became supervisor and then eventually actually deputy director of resettlement for the largest resettlement agency in Utah. And then I said, let me get an MPH. So I started my MPH at the University of Utah, and I was focusing on refugee and immigrant health. The date isn't exactly noted here, but in 2017, refugee resettlement was shuttered because of the travel bans. And so all of a sudden I had a lot of free time, and I decided instead of 1 degree, I think I'll do 2. So I was halfway through my MPH, and then I started my MPP, because what more than that particular experience to teach me that policy decisions at the top really trickle down into and affect people's lives. And so I began my Master's of Public Policy also at the University of Utah. I did do my coursework for my MPH, half of my coursework for my MPH at a campus in Seoul, South Korea, which was very cool. So if anyone is thinking about an MPH, we should talk more. It was a great experience. Um, so then I continued in grad school. I was kind of working and in school part-time, and something I did is I worked at the CDC. I was something called an ORISE fellow, which means it's flexible hours. It's excellent for people in school. You can be full-time in the summer and part-time when you're in school. It's sort of built for that. But before I get too much into that, because I'm telling you all about how women's studies has weaved through my career, my appointment at CDC was also directly related to my women's studies education. So just briefly, I'll say that I was active on the Mormon feminist forums at the time, and I made a friend that also wrote blog posts. And I didn't ask this person before saying this, so I will leave their name out of it. But I found out that they were a very accomplished public health professional at CDC. And I said, "Oh my gosh, I'm studying public health. That's amazing. Can I talk to you?" And this person became my fairy godfather. He said, "I have a job for you. You can live in my basement. You can drive my car. You come and work at CDC, and I will mentor you in public health." So I went, and I was expecting to live in Atlanta for 3 months of that summer, and then go part-time as an ORISE fellow for the rest of graduate school. But I'm sitting there. I'm a nobody, right, you guys? I'm like one step up from an intern. I'm taking notes in a meeting, and they go, "Well, we're not able to send money for this big meeting, this big effort that CDC was supporting in Tanzania. There was some policy change, and they just weren't able to send financial donations." They said, "If we happen to have someone who had been in Tanzania before and could speak Swahili, then we could send them, but to support this group. But we don't." I mean, everyone's looking at each other like, "Yeah, that's, you know." And I'm like, wait, I can do that. And so I raised my hand and I said, "I can speak Swahili, and I've lived in Tanzania before." And they said, "Okay," and I was on a plane a week later. So I finished out my summer in Dar es Salaam, Tanzania, where I was stationed as a CDC employee, but I worked for the Tanzanian Ministry of Health, and my work was food fortification. So here in the US, flour is fortified with folic acid and things like that, and that helps protect against birth defects. In places like Tanzania, they don't have centralized milling, and it happens, you just go to like your village miller, right? You grind your flour yourself down the street, and so the addition of folic acid and other fortification is more difficult, more complicated. So my work was to create a pathway and education for those millers to understand and to know the importance of adding folic acid and things like that. So that was also very women's health related, and that's what I was doing in Tanzania. I came back because, oh yeah, I had a husband. He was here. He was working as a public school choir teacher, so he couldn't gallivant around with me. And I came back and I finished graduate school. And during that time when I came back, I worked on the Hill as a legislative staffer in the fiscal analyst office, where, fun fact, I wrote the fiscal note about the cost of installing Martha Hughes Cannon in Washington, D.C. So I was the one that wrote that fiscal note. I also was a policy analyst for Health and Human Services. I finally finished my master's degree, as I said, and then I followed the siren call of excellent maternity leave, and I left government and I went to the private sector. I began working for a French company called bioMérieux, and they make infectious disease diagnostics. I think that the next slide might be a little bit of a jump scare. So, okay, so the year is 2019. any self-respecting epidemiologist, and I'm looking at my public health folks on the back row, could have told you in 2019 that a pandemic was inevitable and that it would be from either a new strain of influenza or a new strain of coronavirus. And we just knew that because they mutate so quickly and they spread so quickly, and it was just almost certain that one of those was going to be the next pandemic. So, and we were due. So I have my favorite picture from the Great Influenza of 1918. That sign says, "Wear a mask or go to jail." And I decided, so I was told, okay, Annette, you have to choose what to specialize in. You're assigned to respiratory. You need to choose what pathogen type you want to specialize in. And I did my calculation and I said, well, I'm pretty sure it's going to be influenza or coronavirus next. And I think it's more likely to be influenza. And I don't want to be part of that. I don't want to be responsible for the next pandemic. And so I chose coronavirus. I found the email, it was April of 2019, where I said, I'm going to specialize in coronavirus. I got it, boss. I'm going to track coronaviruses. I'm going to make sure that I let you know if anything weird happens with coronaviruses. Well, I mean, something weird happened with coronaviruses, and that's how I ended up being the first person at my company to send increasingly urgent emails in December of 2019. Oh, there's something new. Uh-oh, it's really bad. Like that's how the emails went pretty much in quick succession. I wanted to include this photo because, first of all, okay, so this is a selfie of me when I got my work from home setup, when we were all working from home. I had pink hair. We all coped in our own ways. But what I really like about it is you can see this like precipitous uptake. Like by chance, this photo has captured the outbreak of the big outbreak of coronavirus in the U.S. Okay. Anyway. Okay. So 2019 to 2021, that was kind of the pandemic years. That was really a blur. I was delighted to be useful. It was crazy. It was busy. I'm really proud to say that my company was the first to bring an FDA cleared COVID-19 test to the market. And I'm even more proud to say that our assay that we designed remains the best, meaning like the most robust to shift, like genetic shift, of any others that followed. So we were both the first and the best. Other companies have had to update their COVID-19 assays, but our company can still use our assay. It's great. But with COVID testing demands, there was, let's just call it a resource shift in the industry, or put more bluntly, there was COVID cash. Like diagnostic companies made a lot of money. And so there was this question, okay, we have all this new resource and we have a lot of install base. We sold a lot of instruments because people really needed COVID testing. So what else can we put on these instruments to make it work, to add value, to be useful, to what's next? What's the next disease state? So especially with point of care tests, that's and that means like think you're going to the clinic. You're not like sending your swab to a big lab somewhere, but the test is being run right there in the urgent care or in the general practitioner where you are. And so there was a lot of development there, and I said, I'm tired of working on respiratory, and I would like to start developing the next thing. And it became a hill that I was willing to die on at work, that the next thing should be having to do with women's health. And again, this was, I think, because of my women's studies education. I had this really deep understanding of the societal impacts of women and like I said, the social determinants of health that are specific to women. And so it worked. This is a little bit technical, but you'll forgive me. And also, I have a pointer that I always use for this. Hold on. Maybe my Mary Poppins bag. This is a vaginal swab. Okay, so you can see here that chlamydia, gonorrhea, and syphilis are extremely prevalent. In this is U.S. specific data. We've seen like a little downtick, which is exciting, but I mean, this is in millions, you guys. So like these are extremely prevalent diseases. There's another group of diseases. I'm probably messing this up. There's another group of diseases called that falls under vaginitis, and that's specific to anyone with a vagina. There are three main causes of infectious vaginitis. One is Trichomonas vaginalis, so that's that TV in the graph over there, Trichomonas vaginalis. That's a parasite that can be sexually transmitted. But another cause is called bacterial vaginosis. Has anybody even heard of that? Yeah. Okay. My public health. Yeah. Okay. So BV or bacterial vaginosis. It's a very interesting diagnostic conundrum. Because it's not the presence or absence of a thing. You know, like if you detect the parasite Trichomonas vaginalis, then you treat it. Something is wrong. You need that to go away. But BV is actually a dysbiosis of the vaginal microbiome. So there's not enough lactobacillus, and other organisms are overgrowing, and it creates a painful situation. It can put you at risk of other STIs. It puts you at risk of long-term infertility. It can cause PID. It's and all of those aside, it's just painful and uncomfortable. And women don't deserve to be in pain and uncomfortable. But there has never been a good diagnostic for BV. And so what has become my passion project is developing an objective diagnostic that can say BV yes or no, so that women can get the treatment that they need and they don't have to live with this. It's extremely prevalent. That's the other frustrating thing, you guys. It's like statistically, all of us are going to get it in at least once in our life. And right now, the diagnostic pathway, you're not going to believe this, but I'm telling the truth. It's called the AMSL criteria. It has 4 steps that nobody does. Step 1 is look at discharge under a microscope. When was the last time you were in urgent care and they whipped out a microscope? Okay? It doesn't happen. No one has microscopes anymore. The second thing is called a whiff test, which is exactly what it sounds like. Okay? So this is what we're working with, ladies. This is how they're diagnosing BV today. I'm telling you all of this to explain to you that women's health is understudied, appreciated, under-resourced in healthcare. And I have put my women's studies degree or minor studies education to work trying to solve that. And so I'm really proud of that. Another thing that is directly related, I think, to my women's studies education is that I'm actually running for office right now. Inspired, of course, by Martha Hughes Cannon. Luckily, I'm not running against my husband, but also inspired by my grandmother. And this is her campaign flyer from when she ran for city council sometime in the 80s. And it is really a pleasure to do this and I feel that she's very close to me when I'm embarking on this sort of crazy thing that's happening right now, and I'm one of the only women running in a crowded field, and it is scary but fun and worth it, and I'm glad for the confidence that I got from women's studies to do that. Let me just make sure I haven't skipped over anything important. Do you guys want me to talk more about vaginitis? Just kidding. Probably not. I bet you weren't expecting to hear vaginal swab today. Or see one. Want to pass it around? No. Okay. So I'm right on track because I wanted to leave some time for questions. So what can we take away from... I hope it's clear that I have almost freakishly tried to model my life after Martha Hughes Cannon. I am a very proud public health professional. I love it. I think that it is the way to do good in this world. It's right in line with my skill sets. And I love her approach to motherhood, so that has also affected me. I love her approach to politics, and I hope to bring that to my own, fingers crossed, future. Um, and and I think another thing that inspires me about her is that I I would like my goal in life to just be ready. A women's studies education is more than just like a job prep certification. There are some majors, I'm not going to name names, but I feel like some are just kind of like you just do it so that you can get a job. But women's studies is about changing the way you view society and the way that you view the world and the way that you prioritize things. And that doesn't have to be, that's, you can do that in any field. That doesn't have to just be public health. It worked for me in public health, and it differentiates me from other people. I'm able to engage in these conversations in ways that the microbiologists can't. And I just, I am, I hope to bring with me this energy of Martha Hughes Cannon, who got 4 degrees and just she was always doing one thing or another, because she, when an opportunity came, she said yes to it, and then she did it. I mean, she accomplished so many things, and that's the energy I wanted to bring into my own life, and I think the energy that women's studies can open for all of you. Just in, you got to pick your thing and then apply women's studies to it, and it's fun and easy, and the world needs it. So that is, oh, I forgot. I was going to say one other thing, which is this is Dr. Hegstrom. Do you guys know Dr. Hegstrom? Okay. She officiated my vow renewal, my husband's and I vow renewal. This, I just wanted to close with this to stress again how important this global women's studies is to me. I think of myself as the mascot, whether you know it or not. But it is, I mean, it changed my life, and I think I would do anything for global women's studies. When Heather emailed me, I said, I'll do whatever you need. I'll do anything for global women's studies. So with that, I'll close, and I'd be delighted to answer any questions.
We have roving microphones. So raise your hand. You don't even have to get up.
Yeah.
Hi, I'm Grace. I'm a political science major.
Nice.
I just wanted to ask for some advice if you're wanting to get a public health master's or like some avenues for working in the field.
In public health specifically?
Yes.
I mean, I think it's nice to work a little bit before a master's degree. So, like, if you're in your undergrad now, it's getting a little bit harder as time goes on to do that, I think. But I think it gives you a little bit more grounding before you go into graduate school to work for a little bit. What the path I took, I liked. I mean, I can only represent my own path, but to work in nonprofit and then go to graduate school. My like kind of frank advice about nonprofit work is that you don't make a lot of money, and it's okay to want to make more money. And so if you do go to nonprofit work, just tell yourself, I'm here to learn for a couple of years, and then I'll be open to moving on to something else. Because something that I've noticed is I see women with big hearts wanting to serve that stay, and they could maybe do other things if they want to. Of course, do what you want, but that's just some very frank advice. Not sure if that was totally what you're thinking of, but an MPH is awesome. I just recommend working first. Yeah.
Thank you. This may seem obvious for this particular audience, but I'm curious as to what some of the direct negative consequences that will occur due to the Trump administration claiming that Tylenol during pregnancy causes autism.
That's a great question. I mean, from a women's studies lens, the thing about that is, let's set aside that it's sort of irresponsible display of data, like their analysis is irresponsible, even more irresponsible to announce it like they did. But setting those aside and looking at it from the women's studies lens, it is just so frustrating that, again, you just blame women because now all of a sudden it is a pregnant woman's fault for taking Tylenol, which is safe. But now she has that guilt, and now everyone can point their fingers and say, "Oh, yeah, it's your fault. You did this," as if women don't get that enough. But it's just so convenient, right? Again, speaking from a women's studies lens, it's very convenient to blame things on women, and it's hard to combat. But there are a lot of excellent public health professionals who are combating it. I have hope that there won't be serious long-term effects. I'm sad for women who might endure pain that they don't have to because of it. But it's just sort of, it's a little unsurprising given the patriarchal nature of the world that that is the scapegoat that was found. That's my comment on that.
I'm an English major, and I am so passionate about medicine and women's health.
Great.
I've ended up writing so many essays on it with my
Me
major.
too.
I'm planning to go to nursing after this, and I'm curious, I don't anticipate a career in public health. How can we be involved as interested citizens?
First of all, have you ever heard of a public health nurse?
No.
Maybe Google it.
Okay.
But also, it's okay. You can just be a nurse. You know, you don't have to be a public health nurse. But like to that, the fact that you're asking the question is already, you're already doing the right thing, because public health is, it's right there in the word, right? Public health. So it's kind of, it implies a community approach, and that includes the one-on-one healthcare providers, like nurses, like physicians, that need to be thinking about things like social determinants of health. So if I were you and I were preparing to go to nursing school, but I wanted to keep a public health lens, I'd make sure that I did some extra reading or some research on social determinants of health, or sometimes you'll see it shortened to SDOH. Yeah. Sorry.
Hi, my name is Annie. I am getting my bachelor's degree in molecular biology right now.
Oh, hi!
And
I'm sorry I slandered microbiologists earlier. I didn't know there was one among us.
it's all right. This is my first time coming.
Okay,
so
great.
I'll keep coming. But I am considering the relative benefits and drawbacks of doing a master's in public health versus a master's of science in public health. Do you have any advice on what would be best, especially with my desire to go into women's health?
Yeah. Okay, so this might frustrate you because the advice is just it depends on what you want to do. But the core difference there is that a master's of science in public health is more research focused. So people that do an MSPH are typically on the track into, they want to get their PhDs, they want to be like traditional researchers. An MPH is more of a practitioner degree, so it's, I'm not saying that if you get your MPH you'll never do research, but it's there's typically not like a thesis component. It's more work study instead of a thesis, that sort of thing. So I think you just have to decide, do I want to be more of a practitioner or do I want to be more of a researcher? And then that's the path that you should choose. There's good people on all sides. I did not do research.
Hi, my name is Natalie. I'm majoring in linguistics right now. I actually did want to go back to BV. I had a question about that. Did you say there was 4 steps to like the diagnostic or something?
Yeah.
What were, so 2-part
I
question.
only told you to. You
Yeah.
are, yes, astute. Okay, where's my vaginal swab? Okay.
What were the other 2? And also, like, do they ever do it? And is it reliable at all?
I love all of these questions. Okay, there are 4 steps to the AMSL criteria. One is pH, so that's like a pH strip. One is clue cell checking, so that's in the microscope. One is the whiff test, which is exactly what it sounds like. And one is the physical exam, so like up in the stirrups, shine a light in there and see what's going on. So those are the 4 steps of AMSL criteria. Most physicians don't want to do the stirrups, and they don't know how to use microscopes, and they can't ever find the pH strips, so they do the whiff test. Which is, you can probably guess, it's not very accurate. And only 50% of the time they even do that. So half of the time, a woman comes in and says, I'm experiencing strange discharge, or it's painful, or the classic signs of vaginitis, and they say, must be a yeast infection, and they give them fluconazole. But they don't check for BV and they don't check for trick. That happens 50% of the time. The 50% of the time where they make half an effort and try to do the AMSL criteria, they're wrong 50% of the time. And the data is very clear about that, so you might as well flip a coin.
If they do all of the AMSL criteria, is it more reliable?
Nope.
Okay.
Great. Cool. Yeah.
I was just gonna add on to that. A lot of times I work at an OB office, so we're testing for this a lot.
Yeah.
So this is like my everyday kind of situation. A lot of times what they do is they'll just treat women with fluconazole and metronidazole together, and just kind of put everything together and just treat them for everything, which is, I mean, not great, but it's kind of like the option they're given when it's not a reliable test.
And there's a 60% recurrence, which I'm sure you've probably noticed too. So 60% of the time, you'll do that, you'll give the treatment even, and then they'll come back a month later and say it came back or it never went away at all. It's really terrible.
Hi, I'm Heidi. I'm a spatial data scientist,
Also my sister.
and I'm her sister. If you could, in your dreams, change one public health policy in Utah, or add one, or create one, do you have like a dream policy?
Yeah. I would mandate maternity leave. I think that the data is pretty clear that that would have the biggest health. The thing about public health is it's all about what's the smallest pivot with the most good. That's what really drives good public health policy. And so to me, that feels like the smallest pivot with a lot of downstream benefits, economic benefits, health benefits, mental health benefits. It's just like it kind of snowballs. And so that's what I would do. I think this might be the last question. Are we done at 50? Okay. Okay.
My question is just, it seems that you've put yourself in the middle of a lot of hard issues where you spend a lot of your time trying to persuade people that are very resistant. What is it that you do to stay positive and hopeful?
You identified the bad luck that I keep finding. First I chose refugee services. That didn't go super great. I mean, it went great until it didn't. And then I pivoted to public health, which is also not really a fun place to be right now with the current political situation. So I think the thing to do is to make sure you have a strong network. And what helps me, I'm getting a doctorate in public health right now, and it feels like the public health system is just crumbling all around me. And so that it's easy to feel a little bit hopeless about that. But what I tell myself is that I'll be there for the rebuild. And I need to learn what I can learn, and I need to be the best I can be, because someone is going to need to rebuild these systems that are being dismantled. And I mean, I would prefer for the crumbling not to be happening at all, but there can be silver linings. There can be in a rebuild, there can be improvements. And so that's what's sort of driving me is okay, the STI lab is gone from CDC for that. I mean, that's a real example. But when we rebuild it someday, what would we do differently? That's motivating. Any other questions? Thanks. Thanks, guys.